Most people at the Grundy County Co-op on a Tuesday morning in March would not have picked Katie Porter to survive a hard year, much less win one. She came in smelling faintly of diesel and wood smoke, in tan coveralls gone almost white at the knees and thighs where the fabric had worn thin. The left knee was patched with canvas from an old feed sack. One cuff had been hand-stitched in dark thread that didn't match. Her boots were clean, but cracked at the toes, and she carried a dented green lunch pail cinched shut with baling twine because the latch had broken 2 springs ago, and she had never bothered replacing it. Outside, her truck sat crooked between 2 polished 1-tons, a 1998 Ford F-150, rust climbing the wheel wells, tailgate held straight by a ratchet strap, passenger door in newer black primer that didn't match the faded red body. The odometer had stopped at 312,441 miles the previous autumn. She knew because she'd written it in a notebook with the date and the weather, then kept driving. At the coffee counter, men in fresh logo jackets stepped around her like water around a fence post. One of them, Trent Barlow, 36, custom applicator, wore a $1,200 watch and drove a 2024 F35 O Platinum with massage seats, looked her over while stirring powdered creamer into his cup. "Still running that museum piece, Katie?" he asked, nodding toward her truck. "Still getting to town," she said. He laughed for the table. "You hear Hale's adding acres this year?" "Real acres, not garden plots." Vernon Hale was at the end of the counter, broad through the shoulders. Golf quarter zip with his seed dealer's logo. Phone face up on the Formica displaying grain futures in green and red bars. He didn't laugh loud, but the corner of his mouth moved. He owned or controlled thousands of acres and had just closed on another section, 640 acres, for a number people repeated in awe. $11,900 an acre. He liked to let numbers do his talking. Katie paid for 1 bag of inoculant and a roll of polytwine. Total, $46.12. Cash. Exact change from a blue envelope labeled March Supplies in block letters. From where Katie stood, no one noticed that part. They saw coveralls, truck rust, lunch pail string. In Grundy and the neighboring counties, she had learned that appearance was accepted as evidence. Debt was mistaken for size, and size was mistaken for success. Katie had heard herself described as the poorest operator in 3 counties, often enough that people said it in front of her now, as if she'd gone hard of hearing with her margins. She was farming 118 rented acres, split between Marshall and Blackhawk counties. No hired hand, no partner, no machinery showroom in her shed. She still wrote crop plans in a dollar store composition notebook, the kind with blue lines and cardboard covers that buckled in humidity. Her favorite phrase, penned at the top of nearly every page, was the same one she'd used for 20 years. Cash flow first, ego last. She hadn't invented it. She had inherited it the way some folks inherit ground. When Katie was 13, her father lost 240 acres in 2 signatures and 1 season of wrong interest rates. He had bought high in the late years, trusting corn at $3.40 and a banker's handshake. The note floated. "Temporary adjustment," the banker said when rates jumped. Her father came home with new papers and no supper appetite, sat at the kitchen table with his cap still on, and ran his thumb over one sentence again and again like he could wear it out. Katie remembered that sentence because she copied it into a school folder afterward, not understanding all the words, but understanding the fear in his shoulders. Borrower acknowledges lender may adjust rate to market conditions without further consent. Within 18 months, their annual interest expense more than doubled. He sold machinery first, then cattle, then 80 acres, then the rest. Her mother went to nights at the nursing home. Her father took a maintenance job at a plastics plant in Waterloo and stopped speaking during meals. Katie learned early that ruin was quiet before it was loud. What changed her wasn't the foreclosure itself. It was an old widow named Darlene Wiebe, who lived 2 roads over and still kept books for 3 farms using column paper and a mechanical pencil sharpened with a knife. Katie started mowing Darlene's yard at 14. By 15, she was carrying grocery bags and sitting at Darlene's table while invoices were sorted into neat piles with a precision that felt like prayer. Darlene had married a farmer who died young and left her with debt, 2 children, and 97 acres everyone told her to sell. She had kept it by turning every decision into arithmetic. People think farming is production, Darlene told Katie one July afternoon, tapping a ledger with her pencil. Production matters, but production without terms is gambling. The terms own you. She taught Katie to build a cash flow sheet before planting anything. Not a hopeful sheet, a mean one. Worst case yields, real fuel costs, repairs likely, not repairs wished away. She made her separate money into envelopes. Seed, fuel, insurance, taxes, reserve. If an envelope was empty, spending stopped, no matter what feelings said. At 16, Katie rented 12 acres from an uncle for $85 an acre and planted sweet corn and pumpkins sold from a roadside stand under a plywood sign. She grossed $9,340 that fall, thought she was rich, then sat with Darlene and subtracted everything. Seed $612, fertilizer $488, waterline $233, market permits $110, gas $417, spoilage and theft $301, rent $1,020, miscellaneous $544, net before labor $5,615. After counting her hours at even $8 per hour, she had effectively paid herself less than minimum wage. Good, Darlene said when Katie looked disappointed. Now you know. The farm doesn't care what you hoped. It pays what it pays. At 19, Katie took an ag mechanic certificate at community college and worked mornings at a machine shop, evenings at a feed store. She bought her first tractor at 21, a used 1984 International 886 for $11,200, paid with $8,000 saved, and a 2-year note for $3,200 at 7.1%. She hated that note so much she paid it off in 11 months and wrote "Never Again" in red ink at the top of the next ledger. That became policy, then identity. Over the next 2 decades, she built a farm operation that looked small from the road and stubborn from up close. She rented modest acres others ignored, especially split parcels with awkward corners that big operators hated. She bought equipment old enough to fix with basic tools and manuals, not laptops and dealer software subscriptions. She kept her living expenses low enough that a bad season hurt but didn't kill. In 2008, when grain swung wild and neighbors chased expansion, she kept 64 acres and banked cash. In 2012, drought year, she sold hay to horse owners and skipped machinery upgrades. In 2019, when several local operators refinanced to pull equity for more land bids, she bought a 19-acre parcel at a state auction for $74,000 cash. No ceremony, no social post, no dealer hat photo. 5 years later, she added 24 acres for $138,000. Then 31 acres from a retiring couple for $201,500, all paid in full. In the coffee circles Katie moved through, nobody tracked those purchases because they happened quietly, through closing offices instead of gossip. Around there, people tracked what shined. By 42, Katie had an operating rhythm so plain it annoyed people who preferred drama. In February, she attended surplus auctions with a flashlight and a grease rag, checking seals and bearings while others chatted. She once bought a 20-foot field cultivator for $3,900 because the paint was ugly and nobody bid. She put $640 in parts and 2 Saturdays into it, then ran it 6 seasons. Another year, she bought a gravity wagon for $1,250, sanded and repainted it in her shed, replaced the auger flighting for $180, and resold it 3 years later for $2,100 after harvest demand rose. Her books treated equipment like livestock: feed it maintenance, cull it at the right time, and don't fall in love. She tracked machinery ownership costs per acre with the same rigor others reserved for yield maps: licensing, insurance, depreciation, repairs, interest, if there was any. Everything landed in one column. The number told her when pride was getting expensive. Her house, a 1-story place outside Conrad, still had laminate counters from the 1990s and a furnace repaired with used parts from Facebook Marketplace. She paid herself a fixed monthly draw, $2,450 for years, then $2,700 when health insurance climbed, and left the rest in business reserves or short-term treasuries. She clipped coupons but bought good gloves. She drove to Des Moines twice a year to load up on canning lids and bulk soap because to Katie, a spread-out penny was still a penny. It wasn't deprivation. It was design. Why don't you scale? People asked, meaning debt. Why not leverage with rates still decent? Katie would shrug and say, because rates are only decent until they're not. The spring everything changed started with Vernon Hale buying that 640-acre tract on a variable rate package stitched together from 2 banks and a private note. At first, people admired the move, expansion still read as confidence in county culture. Then the rate environment shifted harder than anyone expected. By early April, Vernon called his tenants one by one. Katie met him in his office above Hale Ag Services, where the carpet smelled new and the wall held framed aerial photos of properties with the yellow boundaries drawn around them like trophies. Vernon slid a lease across the desk without small talk. Cash rent moves to $430 this season, he said, and we're adding an equipment standards clause. No obsolete tractors on my ground. Need efficiency and reliability. Katie looked down the page. $430 per acre, up from $265. On 118 acres. That was $19,470 more before seed touched soil. The clause required late model machinery suitable to preserve timeliness and field quality. Language broad enough to remove anyone not carrying new iron. She did not argue in the room. She asked for 48 hours. At her kitchen table that night, she opened her notebook and built the sheet Darlene had taught her to build. Mean assumptions, no optimism tax credits. Then she opened another page and did something harder. She questioned her own setup. Her John Deere 642, the nicest thing she owned, had become a sacred cow. Reliable, yes. Paid for, yes. But capital tied in steel was still tied. She called 3 buyers over 2 days and sold it for $48,700 to a livestock operation near Cedar Falls. From that check, she wiped out her operating line. $33,900 at 9.5% interest. Gone. She cleared $6,400 in credit card input balances. Gone. She took the remaining $8,400 and built a short treasury ladder yielding 5.2%. Then she called Vernon and declined the lease. The county heard before noon. By week's end, she had secured a rougher parcel, 36 acres with uneven drainage and fence lines like bent elbows, on terms she could survive. Instead of chasing commodity acres at pride rent, she pivoted to food-grade black beans, popcorn, and squash contracts that paid for quality and traceability over sheer volume. She hired 2 teenagers from town, siblings with no farm background, at $17 an hour, and taught them to set spacing strings, hand-place seed in touchy spots, and log labor blocks on clipboards. When the first rows went in by hand, trucks slowed on the gravel road just to watch. Some drivers laughed openly. At the co-op, Trent Barlow raised his cup and asked if she wanted to borrow a horse. Vernon told anyone who'd listen that Katie had quit real farming. He said by harvest she'd be begging a bank for mercy and maybe a part-time job to cover tax bills. Katie heard all of it and kept writing numbers in her notebook, one line at a time, as if weather were coming and she intended to be ready. The weather came first. On the 3rd week of April, rain settled in for 4 straight days, turning the headlands on Katie's new 36-acre parcel into black paste and pushing planning back just enough to make everyone edgy. She used the delay to service hand tools, sharpen hoes, and sit at her kitchen table with a stack of old composition books piled high enough to hide the salt shaker. Mara and Eli Jensen, the 2 teenagers she'd hired, showed up one wet afternoon to ask if they should still clock in. "Yep," Katie said, sliding 2 ledgers toward them. "If we can't plant, we plan." Eli flipped one open and laughed softly. "You keep all of these?" "Every season since I was 16. "What for?" "So Panic has somewhere to go besides my decisions." She turned the 2006 notebook around and ran a finger down a page full of tight numbers. "Look," she said. "This is what small looked like. 2006, 52 rented acres. Gross revenue $61,400. Inputs, rent, fuel, repairs, $45,980. Net before living draw, $15,420. She paid herself $21,600 that year anyway by taking winter welding shifts. Farm shortfall covered by labor, not debt. 2007, 58 acres, better yields, gross $79,200. Net before draw, $23,870. First emergency reserve account opened with $8,000 at 4.6%. 2008, wild commodity swings. She refused to pre-buy a bigger tractor despite dealer incentives. Net before draw, $19,040. Added $6,000 to reserve, bought nothing major. 2009, wet spring, late harvest. She bought a used grain drill for $4,200 cash and repaired it herself for $410. Net before draw, $17,880. Opened a Roth IRA, contributed $3,500. 2010, 64 acres, grows $96,300. Best yet? Instead of upgrading iron, she put $25,000 into a 24-month CD ladder averaging 2.9%. Mara looked up. "So you were making money and still not buying stuff?" Katie gave a half smile. "I was buying time." She pulled the 2011 to 2015 books into view, each one with the same phrase on the inside cover. Cash flow first, ego last. 2011. New bin fan motors, $1,180. Truck transmission, rebuild, $2,900. Net before draw, $21,100. No borrowing. 2012 drought years. Corn hurt, bad county-wide. Katie shifted hay ground and sold baled forage to horse owners. bringing in $14,600 side revenue. Farm net before draw still positive at $8,940 when many around her went negative. She did not touch reserve. 2013, strong rebound. Net before draw, $31,700. Reserve hit $61,000. First direct treasury purchase, $20,000 in 3-year notes at 1.4%. Small yield, high sleep. 2014, added 7 rented acres no one wanted because of poor access. Net before draw, $28,300. Put $10,500 into SEPIRA. 2015. Commodity prices softened. She cut nitrogen rates with precision blocks, reduced input spend by $4,700 without yield collapse. Net before draw, $24,900, added $12,000 to Treasury ladder. Eli whistled. This is like boring. Boring is beautiful, Katie said. Boring survives. By 2016, she had systemized everything. Every dollar got a destination within 24 hours. Operating cash, tax bucket, maintenance reserve, investment bucket, or land fund. She capped personal spending, refused lifestyle creep, and treated windfall years as temporary weather, not new identity. 2016. Gross $112,000. Net before draw $33,200. Added $18,000 to land fund. 2017. Equipment repairs spiked to $11,400 after 2 major breakdowns. Still no note. Net before draw $20,600. 2018. Trade volatility hit grain bids. She forward contracted less, held more cash. Net before draw $18,900. Land fund crossed $70,000. Then came the purchases nobody clocked, because they weren't loud. Bought 19 acres at a state auction for $74,000 cash, plus $2,900 closing costs. Everyone at the sale talked about a different 160-acre tract that brought headlines. Katie's buy was a side note, but it ended one rent risk permanently. 2020? Pandemic year, supply weirdness everywhere. She increased on-farm spare parts inventory by $3,200 and avoided emergency dealer pricing later. Net before draw, $29,100 despite disruptions. 2021, strong commodity year. Net before draw, $52,400. Instead of buying new machinery under Section 179 pressure, she split surplus, $20,000, treasuries, $12,000 retirement, $8,000 land fund. 2022, fertilizer spike year. She reduced exposure by rotating acreage and negotiating smaller time purchases. Net before draw, $27,500 while neighbors absorbed 6-figure input bills. Bought 24 acres for $138,000 cash. Treasury ladder reached $403,000 face value. No long-term debt. Bought 31 acres for $1,500 from retiring couple, plus tile repairs on that parcel. $18,600 over 2 phases. Retirement accounts crossed $400,000. Cash reserves equivalent to 19 months of living draw. Mara stared at the columns for a long time. So when people said you were broke, they were looking at paint, Katie said, not balance sheet. By the time the rain broke, the ledgers were stacked again, but Eli asked if he could photograph 2 pages for motivation. Katie said yes, then made him promise to include the ugly years, not just the high ones. The people who had made different choices weren't stupid. That was the part Katie repeated whenever gossip turned mean. At the co-op, she could name exactly why men like Trent Barlow expanded when they did. From 2016 through 2021, money had been cheap, land kept climbing, and tax rules rewarded equipment purchases that reduced taxable income now while pushing pain into later years. If your lender approved the line and your neighbors were adding acres, standing still felt like volunteering to disappear. Trent had built a serious operation fast. From 420 acres, custom work and row crop farming, to 1,870 controlled acres in 7 seasons. To do it, he carried 3 equipment notes and an operating line that moved like a tide. Last winter, his sheet looked like this. Combined note balance, $612,000 at 6.9%. Annual payment, $108,400. 2 tractor notes combined, $441,000 at 7.2%. Annual payment, $79,000. Operating line peak, $1.14 million, floating. Cash rent obligations, $612,000 due across staggered dates. At $4 diesel and normal yields, it penciled tight but workable. At $5 plus diesel, softer basis, and delayed planting windows, tight became brittle. Cal and Denise Rudder were another case. They had expanded from a family 300-acre base to nearly 2,400 managed acres by taking on short-term leases at aggressive rent and financing drainage improvements through variable notes. They weren't reckless. They were skilled and hardworking. And for several years, they looked like the local model of modern ag done right. Their lender had encouraged scale to spread fixed costs. Their accountant had shown them depreciation advantages. Dealers had offered low teaser rates on late model equipment with telematics and service packages. Every piece had logic by itself. Together, it created a machine that required perfect seasons to stay smooth. By spring this year, Rudder Farm's annual debt service had climbed from $268,000 to $451,000 after resets. Cash rent commitments topped $910,000. Input prepay financed on revolving credit came in at 10.1%. One hail event or one major basis move would erase working capital. Nobody saw those numbers at the diner, of course. They saw polished tanks, clean trucks, and branded jackets at the basketball fundraiser. There was also Miguel Santos, who had moved from pure custom combining into leased acres after 2 strong years. He financed a near-new sprayer at 5.4% fixed, safe at the time, then had to roll short-term operating debt at 9% when rates jumped. He told Katie in line at the parts counter, not joking, "My fixed-rate machine is anchored to a floating-rate life raft." Even Vernon Hale, for all his swagger, wasn't a cartoon villain in the math. He had ridden a decade where leverage magnified gains. Land appreciated, tenants paid, equity statements glowed, banks competed for his business. Expansion had worked until rate risk stopped being theoretical. In a county where ambition was measured in acres and horsepower, caution looked like fear. But Katie had watched enough cycles to know this. When one variable changes, rates, fuel, weather, policy, the strategy that depended on everything staying favorable got judged all at once. She didn't gloat. She also didn't pretend all models were equally durable. May hit like a hammer. A 2-day storm dropped nearly 7 inches across parts of Marshall and Blackhawk counties. Road ditches overtopped. Newly worked fields crusted and ponded. On Katie's rough 36, the low corner by the old fence stayed under water long enough to force a replan on nearly 4 acres. Mara and Eli spent a whole Saturday hand-resetting rows where machine planners would have smeared seed trench walls anyway. By June, diesel crossed $5.07 at the station outside Conrad. Urea had come off its peak, but still ran high enough to punish over-application. Crop insurance paperwork changed under new reporting timelines that penalized late submissions with reduced prevent plant flexibility, and a lot of operators were already behind from weather delays. Katie went to her bank, not because she needed a giant line, but to establish a seasonal backstop for contract crop handling and labor timing. She asked for a modest $45,000 operating facility with collateral coverage far above that amount. The banker, younger than her by 10 years and reading mostly from a screen model, declined. "Insufficient growth profile," he said. Katie waited. He clarified, "Your acreage trend is down. Underwriting likes expansion indicators." She folded the denial letter, thanked him, and walked out to her old truck in the drizzle. In the parking lot, she laughed once, not happily, and drove home to shift $50,000 from maturing treasuries into operating cash. No committee needed. By July, heat settled in, 10 straight days above 95. Corn leaves rolled by noon across half the county. Basis widened when River Logistics snarled briefly, cutting cash bids at exactly the wrong time for those who needed grain sales to hit payment dates. Then the rate notices arrived. Variable notes that had reset once reset again. Numbers that had seemed temporary became annual reality. Vernon Hale's total debt stack, now around $5.8 million, moved from an average rate near 4.25% to about 8.1%. His annual debt service, which had been roughly $302,000, projected near $517,000. That gap, over $200,000, wasn't a nuisance. It was oxygen. He called tenants harder. Rent had to rise. Terms had to tighten. Equipment clauses had to protect asset quality. Every conversation carried urgency he tried to frame as professionalism. Casualties started showing up in courthouse filings and auction bills taped to bulletin boards. Hensley Brothers, Ag LLC out of Southern Blackhawk, missed a covenant test after their operating note renewed at 9.2%, and their 2022 machinery purchases came due together. Liabilities listed near $3.4 million. They filed Chapter 12 to stop immediate liquidation. Pierce Family Farms, long considered solid, sold a 2-year-old combine and 1 planter in a July liquidation event after a lender demanded principal curtailment of $180,000 they couldn't meet on schedule. The sale covered the curtailment but gutted harvest capacity, forcing expensive custom hire. Rudder Farms negotiated emergency interest-only terms through harvest on 1 facility, buying time but adding about $67,000 in additional finance costs to the next cycle. At the co-op counter, the tone changed. Less teasing, more muttering. People who had laughed at Katie's hand planning now asked, quietly, what her fuel bill looked like, what she paid in machinery ownership per acre, how she structured reserves. She answered plainly. Old setup was costing me about $122 per acre, all in on machinery ownership, once I told the truth about depreciation and repairs. Custom tillage plus hand labor on these specialty contracts is running around $61 per acre, before fuel savings. Some nodded. Some looked away. A few were offended by the implication that simplicity could outperform scale. One evening, near the end of July, Vernon pulled up at the edge of Katie's field while Mara and Eli loaded squash crates. He stood by his truck, shoes too clean for the mud, eyes scanning the rows like he was searching for proof of failure. "You still planning to make this pencil farm experiment work?" he asked. Katie set a crate down, straightened, and wiped her hands on her coveralls. "It's not an experiment," she said. "It's underwriting." He gave a short smile that wasn't friendly. "You can't run a county on caution." "No," she said, "but you can lose one on leverage." He drove off without replying. That night, Katie updated her notebook at the kitchen table, the same way she had for decades. Date, weather, labor hours, diesel price, cash on hand, receivables, risk notes. Outside, heat lightning flickered above the bean rows. In the margin, she wrote one line and underlined it twice. "Interest rate risk is the predator now." The words were still ringing from the field edge when Katie tore that underlined sentence out of her notebook and folded it into her shirt pocket. She drove straight from Vernon's Lane to town, dust still on her cuffs. By noon, she was at the county extension lot outside Grundy Center, where a midsummer field walk had drawn more people than usual. Young operators in seed caps, older landlords with crossed arms, 2 lenders, a couple agronomy reps, and a surprising number of folks who had never once asked her for advice when times were easy. Extension agent Claire Madsen started with drainage, heat stress, and disease pressure. Then she turned toward Katie. "Before we break," Claire said, Katie brought historical records on overhead and margin resilience. "If you're willing, could you show what you told me on the phone?" Katie hadn't planned to go that far. She had brought 1 milk crate of ledgers, not a sermon. But she saw Mara and Eli in the back, standing on the toes of their boots to see, and she saw Miguel Santos near the hydrant, with his hat in his hands like he was bracing for weather. So she set the crate on a folding table and opened it. "Most of you know my acres went down this year," she said. "That was on purpose. I sold iron, killed debt, and moved to contracts I can underwrite without praying for mercy. If that sounds small, fine. Small is not the same thing as weak." Someone in the back said, "Easy to say if you're already comfortable." Katie paused. "You're right. Let's do this clean?" She took a black marker from Claire, turned to the portable whiteboard, and wrote, "As of July 31st, personal plus farm balance sheet, conservative valuation, land 19 plus 24 plus 31 acres, all paid, $566,000, treasuries and CDs, $612,000, retirement accounts, Roth plus SEP plus brokerage IRA, $400 to $41,000, operating cash and money market, $168,400, contract receivables, documented, $129,700, equipment and tools, liquidation value, $103,800, inputs and supplies on hand, $21,600, total assets, $2,042,500. Then she wrote the other side, accounts payable, current cycle, $18,200, accrued tax liabilities set aside, $6,900, total liabilities, $25,100. She capped the marker and wrote the last line in block letters. Net worth, $2,017,400. For a few seconds, no one spoke. You could hear the buzz of the sodium light over the machine shed door. Trent Barlow actually laughed once, short and disbelieving. "That can't be right." "It is," Katie said. "And it's not because I found some trick. It's because I never let debt decide my planting." One of the bankers, Nate Hollis, the same office that had declined her line, stared at the board, then at her. "Why didn't you show this when you applied?" "I asked for a seasonal facility, not applause," she said. Miguel stepped closer to the table and looked down at the ledgers like they were court evidence. You did that on under 120 acres? Over 20 years, yes, Katie said. With bad seasons included. Especially bad seasons included. Claire, the extension agent, looked half proud, half stunned. Would you be willing to walk people through the 10-year comparison you showed me? Katie nodded. After this, yes. But if all you hear is the net worth number, you'll miss the point. The point is not to die from fixed obligations. Vernon Hale had come in late and was standing near the open bay door, phone in hand. He didn't interrupt. He just watched the board with a tightness around his jaw that looked new. After the crowd thinned, the people who stayed were mostly under 40. They didn't ask about yield trophies. They asked how to keep from getting crushed by payments due on dates that didn't care about weather. Miguel spoke first. My supplier moved one input balance to 11.8% if I carry past August. I can pay it, but not without selling grain early into terrible basis. How much? Katie asked. 38,000 even. Bring me the statement and your last 2 years, Schedule F. No stories, just numbers. He blinked. What for? So we can see whether you need help or discipline. By evening, 6 farmers had emailed documents. Katie sat up late with a calculator, tea gone cold, and gave each one the same treatment Darlene Wiebe had given her. No optimism, no ego, math first. 3 didn't need rescue. They needed to stop leaking cash on avoidable machinery and non-essential upgrades. Katie told them exactly that. 2 were too far upside down for a private bridge to matter. 1 was salvageable now, and 1 was entry-level fragile, in a way she recognized from her own early years. She took $150,000 from maturing treasuries over 2 tranches and built a simple private pool with an attorney and Conrad. Secured notes only, fixed rates below commercial stress rates, mandatory monthly bookkeeping check-ins, automatic stop clauses if reporting lapsed. Help tied to behavior, not sympathy theater. The first note went to Miguel Santos. Principal, $38,000 in rate, 4.25% simple interest. Term, 18 months, interest only first 6 months, then amortized. Collateral, second position lien on trailer and assignment on contracted receivable. Conditions, no new equipment debt, monthly cash flow sheet, due by the 5th Miguel used it to retire the 11.8% supplier carry. His interest cost on that balance dropped by roughly $2,390 over the next 12 months. And more importantly, he didn't dump grain into a bad basis week just to satisfy panic. The second note was to Hannah and Drew Kellerman, a young couple trying to start on 52 leased acres near Beeman. Their landlord wanted first-half rent and input proof up front. They had skill, a decent plan, and almost no working capital after a spring transmission failure. Principal, $24,050, rate, 3.75%, term, 24 months, collateral, UCC on crop proceeds, plus personal guarantee, conditions, separate living and farm accounts within 30 days, no unpaid family labor hidden in books, quarterly review with Katie, and extension office. Katie also paid their legal filing fees, $1,420, so the documents were done right and nobody could forget terms later. She covered 2 additional support pool legal costs as well. $1,860 for master secured, note drafting and compliance language, and $760 for UCC searches, filing, and lien recording on the first closings. The third support wasn't alone. It was payroll and future. Mara and Eli had worked through heat that broke older men. On the August pay run, Katie handed each of them an envelope with their normal wages and a second check. Mara Jensen, $3,000 tuition grant to Marshalltown Community College AG Business Program. Eli Jensen, $3,000 tuition grant to Diesel Tech Certificate. She sat with them at her kitchen table and opened Roth IRA accounts in their names, putting in $1,200 each as starter contributions, then matched the first $50 per month they deposited from wages through year-end. "This is not charity," she told them. "This is compounding." Eli turned his check over twice, like he expected a catch. "There is one catch," Katie said. "You both bring me your monthly budget. If you can run your own cash before 20, you'll have options at 40. Word spread anyway, because in farm counties, numbers always travel. By the following week, Katie had committed $70,450 in direct financing and grants, plus $4,040 in legal and filing support, and set aside another $22,000 as uncommitted reserve for one more case if it met rules. At church basement supper, someone called her the county bank in coveralls. She corrected them. "I'm not a bank. Banks lend against collateral and policy. I lend against behavior and arithmetic. Different business." The practical outcomes started showing almost immediately. Miguel kept both part-time employees through harvest instead of cutting one shift line. Hannah and Drew got the lease secured and planted on time, avoiding a full-season delay that would have likely ended their first year. Mara and Eli stayed on through contract harvest and entered fall classes, with tuition gaps cut by half. None of it was flashy. No ribbon cutting, no social media drone footage, just fewer families making emergency decisions at the worst possible moment. 2 Thursdays later, Claire convinced Katie to run the full numbers session at the fire station meeting room. Folding chairs filled before start time. 63 farmers signed the sheet. Katie taped 12 pages across the wall, 10 years of side-by-side performance, same county realities, 2 different operating models. "Before anyone argues ideology," she said, "argue the inputs." She pointed to page 1. Model A, leveraged corn/soy expansion, county composite assumptions. Model B, mixed crop, low overhead, contract weighted. Each year listed net margin per acre after true machinery ownership, financing cost, and labor value. 2014, A equals $84 per acre, B equals $102 per acre. 2015, A equals $41, B equals $93. 2016, A equals $67, B equals $109. 2017, A equals $58, B equals $96. 2018, A equals $22, B equals $74. 2019, A equals $31, B equals $88. 2020, A equals $47, B equals $95. 2021, A equals $126, B equals $141. 2022, A equals minus $19, B equals $54. 2023, A equals minus $77, B equals $58. She underlined the averages. 10-year average net margin. Model A equals $38 per acre. Model B equals $91 per acre. Then she added the stress layers. Borrowing cost at 7%, 8%, 9%. Diesel at $4.20 and $5.10. One weather loss year every 4. On the 9% slide, a hush settled over the room. Half the sample farms turned cash negative, under $450 rent, unless yield and basis both hit favorable ranges together. Cal Rudder raised his hand. "You're assuming disciplined spending in Model B. Most people won't do that." "Correct," Katie said. "Discipline is the strategy." Without it, none of this works. Nate Hollis, the banker, asked from the side wall, "How are you valuing labor in both models?" $22 per hour operator equivalent, $17 per hour field labor, no free spouse labor fiction, Katie said. If your model only works when labor is pretend free, your model is lying. She flipped to the last page. Aggregate impact if 20 local operators shifted just 15% of acres from high overhead commodity dependence into lower fixed cost contracts and cut machinery ownership costs by 1/3 over 3 years. Projected reduction in combined annual interest expense, $418,000. Working capital improvement after year 3, $1.26 million. Estimated decrease in forced asset sales during bad cycle, 41%. These are not promises, Katie said. They're directional math, but the direction matters. After the session, people didn't crowd around Vernon like they used to. They crowded around the wall pages, taking phone photos, arguing over assumptions in low voices that sounded less like boasting and more like triage. Vernon stood by the exit, face unreadable. As he passed Katie, he said quietly, "Oh, you're scaring tenants." Katie looked at him. "No, your rate structure is scaring tenants. I'm just translating." Outside, dusk settled over the trucks lined up by the curb. Mara and Eli were helping fold tables. Miguel lingered by the bulletin board, smiling for the first time in weeks as he checked his updated payment schedule. Katie gathered her ledgers back into the milk crate, slow and careful, like putting tools away after a long day. For the first time all summer, the ridicule had gone quiet. In its place was something Vernon could not refinance, people comparing numbers out loud. People started calling it spreadsheet night before the chairs were even put away. By Saturday morning, screenshots of Katie's break-even sheets were bouncing through group texts, pinned to shop corkboards, and folded into coat pockets. At Jensen Repair, a copy sat under a coffee mug ring. At the co-op, someone had highlighted one line in yellow. At $450 rent and 8% money, one bad weather event equals insolvency. Lease renewal week opened in a hard wind. Vernon held meetings in 20-minute blocks upstairs at Hale Ag Services. Same office, same framed aerial maps. He'd raised the ask again. $450 per acre, plus equipment standards and tighter payment dates. Market aligned, he called it. The first tenant in was a man who'd farmed Hale ground for 9 years. He sat down, took off his cap, and put Katie's printed sheet on the desk before Vernon could start. "I can't make this pencil," he said. "Not with my debt service where it is." "Then you're not efficient enough," Vernon replied. The man stood. "Or maybe your rent isn't." By Monday night, 4 had declined. By Tuesday afternoon, 7. By Thursday, it was 11. Some were loud about it, most weren't. They came in with calculators, not speeches, and slid contracts back unsigned. One couple had circled Vernon's equipment clause and wrote in the margin, "No field quality without operator solvency." Another tenant had his teenage daughter read the numbers aloud so he wouldn't be talked over. At the diner in Grundy Center that Friday morning, 3 tables were doing break-evens on napkins. Nobody was arguing politics. They were comparing interest rates, fuel assumptions, and rent dates like people checking flood maps. Katie sat at the end of the counter with black coffee and toast. Trent Barlow came in, saw her, hesitated, and took the stool beside her. "You were right about one thing," he said quietly, eyes on the grill. "Only one?" Katie said. He gave a tired half-smile. "Maybe 2. I ran your format on my acres. If I sign at $450 on the last 320, I'm working for the bank." "So don't sign," she said. He rubbed his forehead. "Easy for you." "No," Katie said. It's expensive for me, too. Just a different expense. I pay with pride and smaller scale. You've been paying with interest. He stared at the steam rising off his cup. What happens if enough of us refuse? Katie buttered her toast. Then rent has to remember arithmetic. At month end, 1,140 acres of Vernon's ground sat uncommitted. That was the number lenders cared about. The covenant test on Hale's operating note hit in early October. Occupancy and cash flow thresholds missed. His lender requested cure options he couldn't produce without either fresh equity or signed leases at terms tenants had already rejected. Grain prices didn't bail him out. Neither did liquidating one parcel at a rushed discount. Buyers smelled pressure and bid accordingly. On a gray morning in November, the Chapter 11 filing posted online before lunch. Hale Land and Leasing LLC liabilities, $6.3 million assets, adjusted. $5.1 million. Katie saw it on her phone while weighing popcorn loads. She set the phone face down and finished the ticket before saying anything. Mara, clipboard in hand, watched her. That him? Katie nodded. You okay? Katie signed the scale slip. I'm not happy somebody went under. Mara tucked the clipboard under her arm. But a bad model went public. That matters. The people she'd helped felt the ground steady first in little ways. On the first Monday of December, Miguel Santos arrived at Katie's kitchen exactly at 6 p.m., boots cleaned at the mat, envelope in hand. The table was set with her standard check-in pile, his monthly cash flow sheet, payable list, receivables, fuel log, and a yellow legal pad. He sat. Payment 1, he said, sliding the envelope across. Katie didn't touch it yet. Report first. Miguel grinned. Yes, ma'am. He read from his sheet. Supplier balance retired. No new debt. Held grain 3 extra weeks. Basis improved 11 cents. Kept Luis and Aaron both on payroll through harvest. Net? Up 12,000 versus panic sale scenario. Katie finally opened the envelope, counted without drama, and wrote the receipt number in her ledger. Good. What did you cut? He made a face. Subscriptions. 2 software things I never used. Shop snacks, don't laugh. Don't. Also postponed upgrading the pickup. I'm not laughing, she said. Leak sink ships. He looked toward the hallway where Mara and Eli were laughing over a grease-stained textbook. Eli asked if I'd take him Saturdays this spring, part-time, learning spraying and calibration. Will you? Miguel nodded. Paid. That's the multiplier, Katie said, writing apprentice slot created in the margin. Stability is contagious if you let it be. 2 nights later, Hannah and Drew Kellerman sat at the same table, shoulders tight with that first-year fear Katie knew by heart. Drew had a legal folder. Hannah had a spiral notebook full of questions. Drew started fast. We got first half rent wired. Landlord signed the 7-page addendum. We separated accounts like you said. Here. He handed over bank statements with colored tabs. Hannah slid over a budget sheet. We found $340 a month in personal expenses we can cut without changing food or insurance. We were paying 3 streaming services and didn't notice. Katie nodded. Good. Where are your records kept? Hannah opened her tote and set down a cheap metal cash box. Inside, envelopes were labeled in marker. Seed, fuel, insurance, tax, reserve. Katie's mouth twitched into a smile. Now you're dangerous. Drew exhaled for what looked like the first time in weeks. Can we make it 7 years? You can make this year, Katie said. Then we make next year. Don't skip steps. She handed them a printed lease template she'd been drafting with her attorney and Claire Matson. Across the top, it read, Beginning operator stability. Lease Draft, 7-year term, starting cash rent, $185 per acre, fixed annual escalator, 1.75%, mandatory annual soil test, and fertility plan review. No surprise equipment clauses. Right to buy option tied to independent appraised value, not auction spikes. Hannah traced the words with her finger. "Who's using this?" Katie said. "If all goes right, more people than us." At semester break, Mara came in from Marshalltown with 2 binders and a laptop sticker that read, "Boring survives." Eli arrived 10 minutes later in diesel tech coveralls, carrying a fuel injector assembly like a trophy. Katie made chili and spread papers across the table. Mara pointed at her class project. "I built a 3-year pro forma for diversified specialty acreage with hand labor blocks. Professor thought I made a decimal mistake because overhead was too low." "You fix him?" "I showed him your machinery cost allocation page." Eli, elbows on table, said, "Miguel let me calibrate nozzles Saturday. Said half the county wastes chemical by guessing." "Half the county wastes life by guessing," Katie said. After supper, she handed each of them a small white envelope. Inside were account printouts. Mara's Roth, $2,147.63. Eli's Roth, $2,131.09. Both stared. "That little?" Eli said. "For now," Katie said. "That little? Early? Beats big late." Mara tucked hers carefully back in the envelope. "I'm going to do this for other kids in town. Like a class. Budgeting and this." Katie nodded once. "Do it at the library. I'll bring worksheets." By spring, Mara's free Saturday workshop had 12 high schoolers, then 19. 2 parents sat in the back, taking notes and pretending they weren't. The fire station room stayed booked the first Friday of every month. Claire Madsen ran agronomy updates. Katie ran cash flow triage. Nate Hollis came twice, then started bringing other loan officers. The first session, he sat with his arms crossed. The third session, he asked if he could present a revised underwriting pilot for smaller operators. He stood by the whiteboard, tie loosened, and said it plainly. "We overweighted acreage growth as a proxy for viability. We're changing that." A murmur moved across the room. Nate held up a new 1-page checklist. Liquidity ratio, debt service coverage, operator record quality, stress-tested rent assumptions, and documented expense controls. "If you bring disciplined books, we can now price that as a strength, not a weakness." From the second row, Katie said, "Put that in writing." Nate met her eyes. "I did." He handed her the policy draft. The multiplier kept widening in quiet rings. Miguel refinanced out of crisis carry and then hired Eli 8 paid Saturdays total during spray season. Hannah and Drew finished year 1 positive and took a tiny adjacent 11-acre lease using Katie's template. Mara's teen budgeting session spun into a county 4-H finance module Claire helped formalize. 3 farmers who never borrowed from Katie still copied her envelope system and cut discretionary shop spend by 5 figures combined. One church benevolence committee stopped issuing one-time emergency checks and shifted to structured, accountability-tied bridge notes after asking Katie to design terms. No ribbon cuttings. Just fewer emergencies arriving as disasters. Vernon's part ended in fluorescent light and legal language. The restructuring hearing was held in Cedar Rapids, 2nd floor, courtroom too cold for the season. Vernon sat at counsel table in a navy suit that fit like borrowed certainty. Across from him were secured creditors and counsel, each with binders thick as cinder blocks. The judge asked direct questions. So did the trustee. Occupancy assumptions, rent projections, interest resets, asset marks. Every rosy estimate got pressed until only hard numbers remained. By the time spring thaw reached Grundy County, a restructuring auction was set. At dawn the sale day, trucks lined both sides of the gravel road. Breath showed in the air. Auctioneers tested microphones while men in insulated bibs studied parcel maps clipped to plywood boards. Katie arrived in the same patched coveralls, lunch pail twine still holding. She wasn't alone. Beside her stood 6 local families: Miguel Santos, Hannah and Drew Kellerman, Cal and Denise Rudder, and 3 other families who'd sat through every spreadsheet night and agreed on one principle. Land had to cash flow before it had to impress. They had incorporated 3 weeks earlier. Prairie Ledger cooperative attorney papers sat in Katie's truck glove box. Governance rules were simple and strict. No speculative flips, transparent books, reserve targets mandatory, lease terms published. When the 280-acre block came up, bidding jumped fast, stalled, jumped again. 2,020,000, now 40, now 40. Katie kept her eyes on the map, not the crowd. 2,040,000 going once. No one lifted. Going twice? Sold. $2.04 million. A breath left the group all at once. At closing, Katie wired $410,000 cash as her cooperative contribution. No personal borrowing. The rest came from member equity and a conservative co-op facility structured with fixed terms and high reserve requirements. Outside the title office, Hannah cried in the parking lot, hands over her mouth. Drew just kept saying, "It's real, it's real, it's real." Cal Rudder leaned against his truck and laughed the way people laugh when they survive the thing that almost took them. "We used to chase acres like trophies," he told Katie. Today felt different. Katie locked her truck door. Today we bought terms. The first lease signing under the co-op happened on a Friday in June at the fire station. Same room as spreadsheet night. Folding tables, coffee urn, kids running between chairs. Katie slid the contract across to Hannah and Drew. "Read line 12 again." Hannah read aloud. "Right to buy, option, exercisable, years 5 through 7 at independent appraised value average of 2 certified appraisers." Drew grinned. "No auction fever." "Exactly," Katie said. "You earn your way in. You don't gamble your way in." Next table over, Miguel signed for a 7-year block at $185 per acre with the fixed escalator clause and annual soil tests. He didn't even flinch at the testing requirement. "Costs me now, saves me stupid later," he said. Across the room, Nate Hollis was helping a young operator understand debt service coverage ratios, while Claire taped up soil sampling dates on a wall calendar. Trent Barlow came late, cap in his hand. He waited until the line thinned, then faced Katie square. "I said some things last spring," he said. "You did." He nodded. "I sold 1 tractor, dropped 2 vanity leases, reworked rent where I could. I'm still carrying too much, but I'm not pretending anymore." He looked around the room. "You got space in these Friday sessions for stubborn people?" Katie pointed to an empty chair. "That's mostly who they're for." By the 5th year, the county talked different. Not everyone, but enough. On the roll call board at the annual co-op meeting, Claire read names and outcomes while rain tapped the station windows. "Miguel Santos?" "Present," he said. He'd paid off Katie's original note 4 months early, then financed a modest sprayer upgrade on fixed terms he could explain from memory. Eli now worked part-time with him while finishing diesel certs, and had started a small calibration side business on weekends. "Hannah and Drew Kellerman?" "Here." They were in year 4 on co-op ground, current on every payment, with a soil organic matter trend line climbing instead of falling. Their right to buy window open next year. They had a baby asleep in a carrier under the table. Cal and Denise Rudder? Cal raised a hand. They had downsized acres, sold the shiniest equipment, and rebuilt margins. Not flashy, but solvent. Denise now taught a winter class called Real Cost of Iron, with Katie, complete with repair truth tables. Trent Barlow? Yeah, Trent said from the back. He still ran hard, but no longer for show. 2 notes retired, 1 restructured, 1 mistake he called expensive tuition. He became the loudest voice against vanity clauses in local leases because, as he told a room of younger farmers, I almost drowned looking successful. Nate Hollis? Here. His bank's new underwriting model had survived 2 audit cycles. Smaller, disciplined operators were no longer auto-flagged as low-growth risk. He still caught grief from old-school lenders. He kept the policy. Claire Madsen? She smiled. Still making everyone test soil and read fine print. The 4-H finance module she and Mara built was now county standard. Kids could explain compounding before they had driver's licenses. Hensley Brothers? One brother stood. Chapter 12 had been rough, but they kept the home place and now rented fewer acres on better terms. Pierce Family Farms? They'd rebuilt around custom harvest and lower fixed obligations. Slower, steadier, and Vernon Hale. Claire paused, looked toward the side wall. Vernon was there, older around the eyes, jacket plain, no logo. After liquidation and court-supervised restructuring, he no longer controlled the empire. He retained a reduced parcel, sold off major holdings, and worked as a contracted land manager for a regional firm. Salary, not speculation. He didn't speak often in meetings now. When Claire said his name, he lifted a hand once. Later, at the coffee urn, he stood beside Katie in a silence that felt less hostile than tired. I blamed you, he said. Katie poured coffee. I know. I should have blamed my assumptions, she nodded. Assumptions are fixable. Pride's harder. He looked at the room where younger farmers were arguing over soil test parts per million and debt ratios like it was normal. You changed the culture. No, Katie said. The math did. People just finally looked. Darlene Wiebe didn't make every meeting anymore. At 91, she moved slowly and used a cane with a taped handle. But on clear Fridays, Mara drove out and brought her in, ledger bag on her lap like sacred cargo. One October evening, she sat in the front row while Katie taught. Separate your living draw from your farm account, Katie said to 22 beginners. If you don't know what your life costs, your farm can't carry it honestly. Darlene raised her pencil from the front row. And stop lying to yourselves about free labor. The room laughed. Katie bowed her head toward her old teacher. After class, in the parking lot, under moth-thick lights, Darlene squeezed Katie's hand. You did what I hoped, she said. You started it, Katie replied. Darlene tapped Katie's lunch pail twine with one crooked finger. Don't you ever fix that latch? It reminds people. Of what, Katie wanted to ask, but she already knew. At 60, Katie still drove the 1998 F-150. Someone had finally repaired the odometer, and it rolled past 400,000 with no ceremony. The mismatched door stayed black primer. The lunch pail still shut with baling twine. Now replaced each spring as routine maintenance, like greasing bearings. On Fridays, she unlocked the fire station early, set out legal pads, brewed coffee, and wrote the same line on the whiteboard before anyone arrived. Cash flow first, ego last, no trademark, no keynote fees, no branded hustle, just farmers, ledgers, and terms. In late summer, after a steady rain, she walked the edge of the co-op's 280 acres with Mara on one side and Eli on the other. Soy leaves shone dark in the fading light. In the distance, kids were chasing each other between pickup trucks while adults argued, cheerfully, about fixed escalators and tissue test timing. Mara nudged Katie. "You ever think about retiring?" Katie looked over the field, then at the old truck by the gate, then at the young families who could stay because numbers finally had a chance to work. "I retired from proving myself a long time ago," she said. "This is just farming." The evening settled. Frogs started up in the ditch. Someone laughed near the shed. Katie lifted her dented pail, twine rough against her palm, and headed toward the lights, where another set of beginners waited, with blank notebooks and too much fear. She sat down, opened the first ledger, and began where survival always begins. Line 1, honest numbers, no ego.